All right, you gloriously miserable accursed, let's get this podcast underway. It's Herle with a special announcement. We're down at Teneycke today. Apparently, Kory is holed up in a beach hut somewhere in the vicinity of Tulum with no internet, no TV, and no way to defend himself. When I say this show never needed his analysis anyway, he's really only here to pretty up the joint with his blazers and bucket of hair gel. But the always beautifully groomed Scott Reid and Jordan Leichnitz are here. Jordan, Scott, now's your chance to diss Kory without him ever knowing about it.
Do you think he takes his turtlenecks to Tulum?
Oh, yeah.
I don't know. I mean, that would fall into the Trudeau wearing jeans on a yacht thing, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I think it might.
Except I assume he has like a full range of all weather turtlenecks. Like I assume he has like a mesh. Maybe? I think he has like a breathable mesh turtleneck, right? Like kind of a nice dry fit turtleneck. I'm reminded every once in a while of what a small town rube I am. I thought Tulum was in Italy. So when he was going on about I'm going to Tulum and he was talking about being on the beach, I'm like, I don't understand. And Tulum is not in Italy.
I was hoping he'd do the show, because he did France and he wore a beret. And I was hoping he would wear a sombrero on the show.
Maybe he'll bring one back. We'll make a special request.
We could be like the American administration. We could just go around the world insulting people everywhere with just sort of jingoistic bullshit.
I mean, in fairness, it's been fairly successful for them.
Yeah, it's hard to argue with.
By the way, I want to make an announcement this morning that since I have never been rewarded for my commitment to peace, I'm giving up on peace. I'm no longer interested in peace. Fuck peace. Because nobody's ever said, David Herle, you love peace and you've done a lot for peace. And I feel I have. So I'm done with peace.
But what's still predominant?
I'm going to get a gold chocolate coin for you. And we're going to super glue a ribbon to it and I'll mail it to you. Are you more interested in peace now?
What's the name of this medal?
It's for sure. It's the Nobel Prize.
I think
obviously, and you can eat it at the end.
I was thinking it's sort of like the FIFA, it'd be kind of the Hawkins cheesy Great Global Citizen Award, and it kind of comes with crumbly orange on it.
Yeah, or maybe a Lemon Heart Prize.
Right.
I think we could make something work for you, David.
The only thing that will pull me back is if I get put on the peace board.
The peace board.
Yeah.
I love it. Yes.
The one you made.
The peace
right.
board.
Everybody has to be a Saskatchewan Roughriders fan and drinks Lemon Heart.
Scott, you can join, but you have to have $1 billion.
I got to have $1 billion. There's that little catch. And that $1 billion may or may not go to humanitarian aid. Actually, it won't. Let's face it. It will not go to humanitarian aid. It will go Donald Jr.'s latest marital payout.
Jordan, you're juggling Germans this week. You've got Germans in town.
Got the Germans in town.
Right. Are they going to defend us or what?
Yeah, I mean, I think.
Wait, hang on. You breezed past that. You went, yeah, well. In the state of the world, we need to know firmly that the Germans have our backs.
You're really worried, huh? Well, I mean, the conversation.
It's the first time I've ever wanted to know that Germany would definitely enter a war.
Yeah, I don't know, guys. It's not good news historically. The conversations are pretty intense, and I think the EU, the chief diplomat for the EU last week was talking about now is time to start drinking, and I think that's generally the vibe. That's we are in an unprecedented place with all of our allied countries weakened economically. A lot of them face their own domestic politics that are really challenging. So it's not a good scene right now. But I do think that there are more conversations now about coming together in a concerted way to oppose what the Americans are doing, and the Greenland issue is forcing that.
Time to start drinking reminds me, Scott, of Airplane, eh? Picked the wrong day to quit sniffing glue.
Yeah. Picked the wrong day to stop sniffing glue. Johnny, what do you make of this? I can make a brooch or pterodactyl. That definitely is where we are at in global world affairs.
It's okay, the French are like, wait, we were supposed to stop it?
So I've mused, entirely to myself, mind you, that it would be awfully nice to have a podcast assistant, somebody to help me with my various tasks around here. Keep that in mind as I tell you more about TELUS's Fuel iX, their award-winning suite of AI products for Canadian business. Specifically, Fuel iX's Agent Assist and Agent Trainer. Agent Assist is a generative AI tool that offers real-time support during live customer calls to help agents while they work. We all know what it feels like to be on the other end of those calls, right? We don't always get the help we need on a timely basis. Well, Agent Assist automatically retrieves knowledge and automates tasks to resolve customer issues faster and deliver better experiences. An up to 42% reduction in research time, up to 30% less time to resolution, and up to 49% reduction in average handle time. Agent Trainer is the AI-powered tool that does exactly what its name promises. It sets up precise AI-generated training simulations for companies to help their customer service agents learn and practice. The old paradigm is traditional classroom and video training. Slow, costly, and often too one-dimensional because specific situational role-playing isn't available. Agent Trainer, on the other hand, is fully customizable to any customer service simulation, allowing agents to practice extensively in a risk-free environment and receive immediate automated feedback. The overall effect is it flat out accelerates service proficiency for agents and reduces training costs and ramp time. With all that AI helpfulness in mind, are you at all shocked that Fuel iX was named Chatbot Platform of the Year at the AI Breakthrough Awards? I'm not, and I might just be fantasizing about the hurly-burly and curse of politics podcast assist. More next week. All right, we're going to spend the whole hour talking about the Kearney China mission, and not about whether it was a good thing for the Canada's economy or not, because I have no fucking idea. But because it exposed a few significant political fault lines. Prairies versus Ontario was a pretty obvious one coming out of it. But I also noticed that there's a growing divide between people who really are fans of the United States, have and think it's realpolitik to stay associated with the United States and don't like the pivot away from the United States, versus people that are admiring Kearney's attraction of business and investment elsewhere. And then lastly, soft power versus, let's face it, one of the lines that rang out of Kearney's visit last week was, we're taking the world as we see it, not as we wish it to be. And people like Lloyd Axworthy have a point of view about that, and I suspect Lloyd isn't alone in that. So all of those fault lines are being exposed by this, and I thought it would be worthwhile talking about it. So maybe, Jordan, since you're so fucking smart, maybe you could just lead us off with your overall take about what Kearney has unleashed with, by the way, we have to acknowledge, in fairness, because people have called us on it out there in the real world, that none of us thought that anything was going to come out of the China visit.
Totally.
That we thought it was just a nothing burger, get to know you thing. And Kearney surprised us all with some big announceables. And there's been some big reaction to those big announceables. So let's hear your take, Jordan.
Yeah, I think that's actually where I would start, is I think when I look at the politics of this visit, they did a good job of lowering expectations in order to over-deliver in terms of the magnitude of the announcement. And I think, just to back up, it is important to say that there are no good choices here for Canada, for this
Nobody's
government.
wearing a white hat.
That's right. And I think that given the circumstances, yes, it unquestionably, it makes sense to go and talk to China, second largest trading partner. We have to have those conversations. And I think if I were to look at what are some of the positive things politically that came out of this for Kearney, I'd say it gives really one of the first strong, tangible signs of pushback against Trump that we've seen in a while. This is clearly something that the Americans, notwithstanding Trump's comments that, the other day that this is not a big deal and this is something Kearney should be pursuing. We've heard that before. He said the same thing about the ads. So, that can change on a dime. But I think here is something where he can tangibly say, I'm taking some measures that might antagonize the Americans, and I'm doing it sort of for the future good of Canada. Fine. I think that politically, the prospect of something like cheaper cars for Canadian consumers, that's never a bad thing politically. And this agreement maybe could be ultimately a bit of a bargaining chip within CUSMA. It gives them something that they can deal with the Americans later on, maybe potentially roll back if they needed to. But I would say, I would fall on a more critical side of the agreement. I think both from a content and from a political perspective as well. I think it opens up some pretty big flanks of weakness for him. And David, you touched on one of them right off the bat, which is that one of the big challenges, I think, that as we confront this American threat and as we go through this really unprecedented period, is the danger has always been regional fragmentation. There are going to be pressures from the Americans that are going to seek to divide us regionally. There are going to be pressures from China that seek to divide us regionally. In fact, that's very much what the canola tariffs were about, was about leveraging some of those regional divisions in order to get to a certain outcome on trade issues. And so I think the really big risk that I see here is that in the agreement that was struck, those regional divides, those regional tensions have actually been reinforced. And so you have a real risk here of the perception that the government has traded, basically horse traded one part of the Canadian economy, in this case, the auto sector, for some temporary gains in other regions and other sectors. And that ultimately is going to be pretty politically problematic for the government when you consider the concentration of seats for the Liberals in Ontario. So we're talking about 70 seats in Ontario. And the auto sector, though it is in a difficult time right now, really does remain an economic engine for Ontario. So those impacts, if that sector is further hurt by this, are going to be felt really acutely in a place where those feelings could have some pretty hard electoral consequences for the Liberals. And, by contrast, like just a reminder, they got one seat in Saskatchewan. So the payoff on that is not...
And not in a heavy canola growing area of the province.
Right.
Yeah.
That's right. So the payoff on that is politically, I don't think all of that great. The other thing I would say is that, when we kind of take a step back, one of the other big criticisms that we've heard, and I've made as well around a lot of Carney's travel and discussions and these trade negotiations that are happening is that there's been a lot of these conversations. There hasn't really been a lot of concrete changes and deliverables that are happening immediately right now to impact people's lives. And I think one of the downsides of this agreement politically is that if you take a step back, what you have in terms of hard outcomes is like, yes, you're going to see people in the seafood sector who are pretty happy about this. You're going to see your canola farmers pretty happy about this. And again, we're talking about something pretty short term, though. It's about 8 months of tariff relief. The agreement is time limited, in exchange for opening up market access on the auto sector to Chinese EVs with a percentage that's clearly intended to grow over time. And so the takeaway message, I think, for a lot of people in Ontario and a lot of working people is that what is the concrete impact here? Well, it's the risk of job loss in that sector here in Canada in the near future. So that's not a great one there. And I would have more to say, I think, about the content, but that's generally how I see it. I think, again, there isn't really a full and thorough story being told by the government here about what the trade-offs are of this deal. Like the deal was presented, but there hasn't really been an effort to talk about how those potential downsides are going to be mitigated here in Canada. And you are really hearing a lot of concern from the auto sector. You're hearing it from Unifor and the auto workers. You're not hearing actually a ton of enthusiasm also from auto parts makers in Ontario. There's real worries about what allowing China into the market will do over the long term. And there's a need for the government to be clear that they understand that risk and that they've got a plan to manage it. And we haven't really seen that so far.
Right now, in orchards around the Mediterranean, trees are groaning with citrus. In the supermarkets of southern Europe, shoppers are presented with a slew of choices, rack after rack of clementines and tangerines and oranges. This is the very peak of citrus season, which runs from November to March, meaning that citrus exporting countries like Morocco have a pretty short window of time to move a massive amount of valuable, ripe, somewhat fragile fruit to Western markets like Canada, where consumers expect to find it fresh and unbruised on store shelves. A few months ago, the international shipping company CMA CGM turned to our sponsor, Canadian National, for help. It needed to transport 27,000 tons of Moroccan citrus directly to key Canadian consumer markets. It had to be done in about 10 days, and the fruit had to be obsessively protected from spoilage along the way. The shipper's previous arrangement, which involved trucking the fruit to Canada from an American port on the eastern seaboard, just wasn't working out. CN, which invests constantly in new technology, offered a tailored solution. Its trains met the shipper's cargo vessels in Halifax and deployed something called its Intelligen system. CN's Intelligen manages the flow of electrical current along the train to cargo containers, in this case maintaining the temperature of millions of oranges at exactly 3 degrees Celsius. The citrus arrived in stores on time and in absolutely the freshest condition possible. CN would like to say that the operation was entirely fruitful. So now you know. Next time you tear the skin off a ripe tangerine and bite into all that deliciousness, you'll know its backstory. It very likely arrived by train. Scott, do you have an overall take you want to share with us, or are you going to get right into the autos?
No, I do have an overall take, I think,
Okay.
because I think that is my take on the autos is the what I would call the bigger picture, lame phrase, but I think a broader look at this thing. First of all, I think, yeah, I want to start with where you guys both did, which is we both assumed there would be modest talk of frameworks and dialogue and processes moving forward. And we got quite a bit more than that. So I think when we look back on this week in the years to come, we will circle this trip and say, this is really quite a declaration of intention. This is really quite, not just in terms of the substance of these agreements, which are more significant than we anticipated. Maybe we're just dummies, but also in terms of phrases like, we take the world as it is and New World Order. And I really think that Carney is saying, this is what it means in reality, in truth, in practice, to live in a world where the United States is withdrawing itself from global leadership, from multilateral institutions, not just withdrawing from them, but actively making certain that they disintegrate, from transatlantic alliances, and of course, in terms of his traditional economic and diplomatic relationship with Canada. This is what that means. And so when he says New World Order, I heard your pod with Jennifer and Dave Mulrooney on the weekend. I don't think he's saying New World Order, and that means we all eat with chopsticks and speak Mandarin. I think he's saying New World Order, a world in which, as we've been saying in abstract for a number of months now, the United States is fundamentally altering its role as, the Western hegemon. And, this is America first in practice. And so I look at it and I hear I see the political tensions and I see lots of political risk. And I think they come. There's political risk in terms of interregional, between regions, tensions here, the West, Ontario versus the prairies. There's ag versus auto. There's all those sorts of tensions. There's obviously another set of tensions, which is how far are we pushing it before Trump responds with hostility. And you saw contradictory signals from the White House on that. Trump himself, being the goofy kind of like, I don't know, he's showing some balls, going out there doing deals. I like guys who do deals, versus like Greer and the Bannons who are going, Carney is an enemy now. Okay. But I think the bigger political, like that's one way of looking at it through the political lens. I think there's another way of looking at it that works politically for Carney very, very well, which is that I do think people accept once we get into the trade-offs and consequences, they're going to be uncomfortable naturally. But I think that people do accept and demand of their leaders that they respond to this changing world. I think there is a real sense of people can sit on a bar stool and have an opinion about what to do on tax policy or on trans and washrooms and all this kind of shit, right? But I think people are looking at this, lots of people, lots of reasonable voters in the middle of their lives, in the middle of the political spectrum, in the middle of the country. And they're looking at this and they go, I don't have a tinker's damn of an idea what to do about all this, how to navigate a world where the United States turns into a hostile, aggressive force against us. So I must look to a leader who gets that we got to do different stuff. Last thing I would say is I also think this works politically because it is seen as a direct response to Trump. And if there's one thing that's been up and down in terms of Carney, it's that awkward dance he must do in terms of how much he stands up to him. And this felt like a more forceful response. So I look at Ontario and I don't think to myself, oh my God, he's going to lose a ton of votes there. And that's where all the seats are from the auto sector. I look at Ontario and I think Ontario does want a leader within reasonable, responsible boundaries who is a response, a reaction to Trump. That is not just in concert with them. And so, when I look at this thing, I think it's a twofer. These politics of the necessary we're seeing, he's opening up different markets. Yeah, we're having to deal with Beijing. We're under no illusion that we share their values, that we trust them on political interference or human rights. And yeah, we're taking money from Qatar because they have money, under no illusion that they are people who share our values and don't support all sorts of murderous, terrifying things. But we're doing that because Trump is forcing us to look at those things. That's track one. Get the money, get the trade options, see what we can do. That gives us alternative options. And then I think the twofer is these things, as Jordan was hinting at, I think they give us options when they deal with Trump. We had no cards on the auto sector until the last 4 days. Now we can say to them, listen, we can turn the dial on this Chinese EV thing. We can turn it from 49,000 to 149,000. We can flood North America through the Canadian back door, and you can do what you want about it, Trump. You can take it out on us. But we could do that, or we could turn the dial back. And maybe that gives us leverage that didn't exist a week ago in terms of those talks with Trump, whether it's on auto sector, whether it's on CUSMA. And it's not so much about doing those things as saying, we're on a track now with China. And if that's your principal foreign policy goal is to contain China, United States, well, then remember that we're a fucking friend. And then we can withdraw and we can slow down this new relationship with China, but only if you're there for us. So I think it maybe gives us some leverage that we didn't have.
So it's been a bit of a busy news environment lately. Chaotic is another way to describe it. Or how about wildly unpredictable? Given that, it wouldn't be too surprising if you missed the recent release of the federal government's official progress report on its climate plan. Short story? The report showed the country is off track, well off track, in meeting its emissions goals. Current policies are not going to be enough to get Canada to its targets. None of this came as a surprise to our sponsor, however, the Canadian Climate Institute. That's because months earlier, they crunched the numbers and arrived at roughly the same conclusion. So what should the country do to get back on track? And why does it matter? And how can we do it while building a stronger, more competitive, diverse economy? Part of the answer is reducing emissions is necessary if we want to avoid substantial damages to our communities and our economy from accelerating climate impacts. But also, there's a massive opportunity out there for Canadian industries that reduce their emissions to sell their products to markets beyond the US who are looking for solutions. The Climate Institute has a range of accessible analyses that can help answer these questions. They've looked at the different policy options from vantage points that go beyond just emissions reduction. Factors like cost effectiveness, affordability, and the impact on the economy. They'll also be taking a much closer look at the government's progress report and the policy options that lie ahead, so stay tuned for that. But in the meantime, go to climateinstitute.ca for more. It's really interesting. I hadn't thought about it that way. I want to do a little bit of it, just a few minutes on this auto thing, Jordan. And I've been surprised. I wish Kory was here. This would be great to have Kory's point of view on this because Ontario and Ford, but I was surprised by Ford's reaction. I was surprised by Lana Payne's reaction. First of all, I was surprised that Ford didn't know. And I'm surprised that Ford wasn't given a heads up on what was going to happen so that it could be explained to him. Doesn't seem like he was, although it does seem like the U.S. was given a heads up um, on it. All that. But listen, I mean, I thought that there was a general view emerging, and I thought Ford held this view that Trump's policy toward the Canadian auto sector was not only designed to kill the Canadian auto sector, but was also likely to result in the collapse ultimately of the American auto sector, as it becomes less and less competitive, as it's sheltered from competition and doesn't adapt to new technologies, etc. And so, I mean, Carney comes back from China with a deal that says you let in 49,000, which is pretty close to nothing. But within 3 years, we expect to be assembling cars and working with supply chains in your country to build cars. Like, why isn't that a win for Ontario and for Unifor?
Well, I mean, I think there's a couple answers to that question, and I would maybe peel apart the question of Ford's response and Unifor's response because I see them as a bit distinct. I think Ford was actually pretty careful in his criticism in terms of pointing to things that he wanted addressed, and he's pretty good at asking questions he knows the answer to. So the demands to get rid of the EV mandate, the push to get for example, Chinese investment to locate factories in Ontario. Those are things I think this government is very prepared to meet. So I think he may end up on the other side of this issue before it's all over. But with respect to Unifor, I mean, look, I think that they're laying out really legitimate concerns based on the current actual facts on the ground right now. The percentage of EVs that they're talking about letting in may be small as an absolute proportion of sales in Canada. And yes, it's matched to what it was 2 years ago. But guys, what's changed in 2 years? Our auto sector is being systematically dismantled by our closest trade partner. So the type of hit that means in the sector today is very different than what it would be 2 years ago. And we also have to think that, or we have to understand that the Chinese auto sector is not a normal business. It's heavily subsidized. It intentionally overproduces cars. It has a deliberate strategy of going into markets and seeking to quickly and dramatically grow market share. And you can look around the world and you can see the consequences of this already. A few years ago, the Chinese market share in Thailand was nothing. Now it's dominant in the auto sector. If you look at the European Union, where they do continue to have tariffs against Chinese EVs, they still lost 100,000 auto jobs over the last 2 years. So they are they have a playbook on this that's very clear and is very effective. And so I think that when you look at the concern, even when it comes to locating factories and doing production of Chinese EVs here in Canada that you're hearing from the auto sector, it's what kind of jobs are those going to be? That's not like a Volkswagen plant coming to Canada. Are those going to be unionized jobs? Are they going to be good jobs with good pay? Maybe, maybe not, because you don't get a $35,000 EV with those kinds of wages. So I think that when you understand that already the current situation for auto workers in Ontario, so like if you look at Land of Pain, if you look at Unifor, for example, they have lost a third of the members in the workplaces that they organize over the last year. The hemorrhaging out has already begun. And so the sector is already in a far more fragile place in terms of employment. So the impact of measures like this, not just today, but over the long term, are going to be really significant. And at the end of the day, we have to decide, do we want to maintain any kind of a domestic auto sector here that delivers those kinds of jobs, those kinds of good family sustaining jobs that build communities? Or are we going to be opening this up in a way that is no longer an option here? And I think that
Just wait, though. 10 years from now, what's going to be more successful, BYD or Ford?
Well, I mean, look, there's no question that the automakers have to innovate and adapt, and low demand is part of the problem too. But that's also what makes some of this a little bit puzzling. So, you talk about scrapping the EV mandate. Well, the EV mandate is also going to stimulate demand. So we're working at cross purposes here. The federal government alone has pledged $31 billion in investment assistance to get EVs to locate factories here in Canada. So we're already making big throws in terms of building that capacity here. So in some sense, that this is working at cross purposes to that. So I think the concerns are legitimate. And I also think, and this goes back to something we've talked about before, for example, in the steel sector, one of the problems with this is that, again, like, who is being protected here in these trade deals and in these difficult decisions and these sacrifices that need to be made? Who is being asked to sacrifice? And in this scenario right now, it's auto workers and the supporting sectors in Ontario that are being asked to sacrifice for what is less than a year of guaranteed relief in other sectors in other regions of the country. And I think politically, that's pretty tenuous.
Scott, how do you see this car thing?
I see it this way, and it's encapsulated in it's captured by Carney's phrase of the world as it is. I think you have to start from this question: what's it going to take to save the Canadian auto sector? And that obviously embedded in that question is the fact that we have an American president who is absolutely categorical in his declaration that he wants to see the Canadian auto sector finished, ended, done, killed, slaughtered. That's it. So I'm not surprised the Uniforce raises these objections. I think I might even advocate for that if I was advising them, because there are all these questions of, if we ended up going down this BYD path, how would it be happening? What would the guarantees for unionize? So put as much pressure and tension into the political system here domestically as you can. However, I do think that, again, this is evidence in my mind that Carney is a couple steps ahead and is trying to two for this thing. And by that, I mean, how do you save the auto sector? Well, one of two ways. Either you resign yourself to a world where it has been killed by Donald Trump, and that's that. And therefore, we start to build Chinese vehicles and we become, that's the only other game in town, the town in this case being literally the globe. Or the threat of Chinese manufacture and sale of less expensive but higher quality cars that Elon Musk is driven mad and loses money over, forces the United States as for a fucking change. Since they're forcing hard choices on everyone else, they're forced to make a hard choice where they're forced to say, all right, well, what do we want more? Do we want containment of China, or right? Or do we want to kill the Canadian auto sector and just try to repatriate all within our continental jurisdiction? And so I don't know how this thing's going to unfold, but I think Carney's saying again, he's like, well, we can make this thing big, or we can make this thing small. We could turn this tap off, or we can fire hose it at you in terms of Chinese vehicles. And it forces them to make that consideration. And so maybe neither of these strategies work. And sure, it's fraught with all sorts of political risk that Trump will go crazy and just decide that he's going to beat the living piss out of all sorts of different sectors in Canada in retaliation. All sorts of political risk in terms of people saying, well, I don't like this. This sounds like a scary world. I think in many senses, when we see the immediate reaction of Doug Ford and Payne, what you're hearing is people expressing their desire, which I think we all share, which is, fuck, man, I just wish the world was the way it was, but it ain't. And so I think this puts pressure on the Americans one way or another. And so, if we're forced to, I guess we make Chinese cars. What are the implications of that? Probably pretty uncomfortable. We're going to be dealing with a regime that is frankly almost villainous. But if fucking Donald Trump leaves us no option, then maybe that's a path we have to travel. Hopefully, that's not what happens. Hopefully, the threat of that causes even his McDonald's addled brain to clear up and say, all right, you know what? Like, maybe this integrated North American auto sector isn't such a bad thing after all. Certainly, if the alternative is to throw my own workers out of their jobs and have the Ford F-150s be that much more expensive, and then begin the slow conquering of the North American auto market by China.
Yeah, I really hope that McDonald's food is not bad for your brain.
It certainly must be.
That would be damaging.
How could a fillet of fish help you think better? It's just not.
As long as Big Macs are okay, I
think you're in the clear, David.
Pretty much what I restrict myself to.
The following message is brought to you by Unsmoke Canada. Not all nicotine products carry the same risk. Smoke-free alternatives, like heated tobacco, vaping products, and nicotine pouches, don't burn tobacco or produce smoke. While not risk-free, evidence shows they have the potential to be significantly less harmful than cigarettes. Yet, Canadian regulations restrict access and limit communication about these alternatives, keeping adult smokers in the dark. Sweden has accepted this science, embraced smoking harm reduction, and driven smoking rates below 6%. Canada has the tools to do the same, but it requires political will. It's time to align regulation with science, expand access to smoke-free products, and empower Canadians to make informed choices. The evidence is clear. The opportunity is real. Canada can be smoke-free. Learn more at unsmoke.ca.
So this, I think, takes us into my next fault line, which is the actual approach to the United States. So this last week seemed to be a little bit of a change in tenor toward the United States, because the deal with China is a clear poke in the eye to the United States. And then I would say Carney's language on Greenland is the sternest he's been about the Trump administration on a foreign policy matter. And so there is evidence of a shift away. And it also appears to me, from monitoring media and social media, that not everybody in the country is good with this, for a couple of reasons. First of all, there are people who, from a purely pragmatic sense, think that the United States is right next to us. It is huge. It is always going to be our most important partner in terms of geopolitics and in terms of the economy, and we're crazy to be doing anything but making that relationship work. And then there's another group of people that actually probably have more in common intellectually with what Trump is doing in the United States than they do with the Canadian sort of consensus, and are angry about Canada turning away from the United States. Almost all of those people are concentrated in the Conservative Party of Canada. They do not dominate the Conservative Party, but all of them are in there. So are we going to end up having, as opposed to it being a consensus that we need to shift away from the United States and do deals around the world and diversify our economy, are we going to have a fight about that, Scott?
Here within Canada?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it would be a short fight. I think it's a problematic issue for the Conservatives, because I think those opposing forces that you just articulated are laid most bare and are most uncomfortable within the Conservative coalition, the current federal Conservative coalition, because I think there are a lot of people that by instinct within that voter coalition, like the demonstration of strength. They consume a bunch of the same media and content, not all of them, right? But there's a portion, say 25 to 40% of federal conservatives who, they're lunching on all that context and conversation, and they like the muscularity of a bunch
not
of
as upset about ICE as I am.
Right. All that stuff. Like they'll go immediately to, you know what, like you got to fucking deal with immigration and blah, 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 and all this sort of stuff. So I think it is a real challenge, for the likes of Poilievre to manage. That's one of the, he's got this fragility within his coalition. When he put out a statement this weekend, as an example, Pierre Poilievre, about Greenland, saying, hey, fuck back off, right? Like Greenland is Greenland. It belongs to Denmark, and we should like that.
Which was a move, by the way. That they must have thought about that tweet
a lot. It's a very carefully worded statement.
And it got a lot of reaction, from...
he has to do that kind of thing.
Right. And I
Right.
thought it was an interesting move because it is poking the bear of that. I don't know how big the cohort is, so I don't want to talk with a specificity that I don't know, but say 25 to 40% of people that, and particularly activist elements, like particularly some of the, the convoy warrior types, right, who do come out to meetings and do show up and will be disproportionately loud. They didn't like it, and
We'll
they're not
be
going
at
to
the
like it.
convention.
That, well, possibly, right? So, um, within the country, your podcast on the weekend between David Mulrooney, former ambassador and longtime senior public servant, foreign affairs officer, and Jennifer Welch. I thought there were hints of what you're talking about here, right? Because David's lens is and has been for many years, and I worked with him when we were in government. I have a high regard for him. His lens is China is the villain in this movie. No matter how objectionable Trump is, no matter how distorting Trump is making America, the fundamentals of America are still so much more in line with us in terms of values and in terms of where we are and where we will be, that
Right.
we must not attempt out of some desire of realpolitik to align ourselves more closely with China and to try to pretend that overlooking some of the uncomfortable aspects of what that involves won't cost us. And I get that. But again, Trump is the fuse that is lighting this explosion. And so, um, I think the country is going to have an uncomfortable relationship with this. I think in the immediate term, Trump's objectionableness, his constancy, he's always barging in our front door, reminding us of how awful he is. I think that's going to cause a lot of Canadians to tolerate a lot of choices we otherwise would not have made. I think it will be soon politically palatable to deal with supply management in a way that was absolutely impolitic, in the same way that pipelines were inconceivable in so many jurisdictions across Canada not long ago. But I don't I don't really think we're going to end up in a great big fight between China and the United States in terms of domestic opinion, because I think people are hoping we can have our cake and eat it too. That by doing some of these measures, we create a plan B that also puts pressure on the relationship with the United States, that hopefully means we can go back to something that's good enough with the United States for now, and that maybe in 2, 3, 4 years, the United States begins to normalize again. And so we can return to where it is. I as much as people say, I feel like the United States is broken up with us, I think people still want the United States to show up 6 months from now with a top hat and flowers and say, I'm coming home.
It's a blizzard outside. Roads are closed. It's freezing and windy. But inside your home, it's normal. It's warm. Auto production lines continue humming. Cement plants keep producing. Energy is oxygen to them. That's natural gas, the province's best friend on such days, says our sponsor Enbridge Gas. Natural gas delivered by Enbridge Gas heats almost 75% of the homes in Ontario, and it shows up no matter the weather. The company's infrastructure runs underground, away from storms, ice, and natural disasters, moments when reliability matters. And this isn't new. Our sponsor, Enbridge Gas, has been doing this for 178 years. From powering Toronto's first gas-lit street lamps near St. Lawrence Market in the 1800s, to safely delivering energy to millions of homes and critical Ontario businesses today, steadily, reliably, safely. Reliability matters in a province that plans decades ahead. Reliability keeps the heat on and the production lines running. You can't run a full-time economy on part-time power. Enbridge Gas has reliably supplied generations of Ontario businesses the energy they need to succeed. And it still does, every single day. Well, I mean, Jordan, let's just keep going with this, because if you're the Conservatives, could you not look a year or two ahead to where this is going, as opposed to where it is right now? Right now, everybody in Canada fucking furious with the United States, like really angry. and Trump is objectionable as all hell, and we're offended and we're all kinds of things. So we don't want to buy their fighter jets, and we don't want to do business with them, and we don't want to all that stuff. So a lot of people are looking at this world play and saying, this is fun, this is great. The truth of the matter is, Trump's policies, no matter what we do internationally, are going to make us poorer in the short run. The United States being next to us and having free trade with them has created a lot of wealth in this country, right? So that change is going to be an awkward and uncomfortable change. And the sugar rush will be off of it, and we'll be into a bad economy, probably an ongoing recession, and deals will be slow in coming. And is it not possible that in a year or two you can be making an argument, this pivot is crazy? Like Canada's entire benefit in the world has been from being next to this country, this economic giant, this essential friend of ours. And we've got to do the best deal we can with them. That is what is in our interest. Is it not possible the debate comes around that way?
I'm not sure it will come around in that exact format. I mean, at the end of the day, I think it's a bit of a false choice, right? There's no getting around the geographic reality of where we're located. And you're quite right. Like, we've had it very good for a long time in terms of ease of access to the market and and the prosperity that's brought to Canada. Things are harder now, but we're not going to change that geography. And so, I mean, it's a bit like if you think about former Soviet states next to Russia, like if they manage to divert 20% of their trade, they're doing pretty well, right? Because that is the reality of the size of the market and the proximity. And I think we're largely in the same situation. So I think you will see openness to things like this agreement with China on an instrumental basis. Canadians are open to this because they see it as a potential tool in order to bring back a more regular relationship with the United States. And this is like the part that I agree with Scott on, which is I think that most people are still living in hope that there is some return to a normal relationship with the United States. I'm not sure that there is, but that is a hope that's out there. And I think that's organizing a lot of how people react to some of these conversations. Now, the challenge, I think, for the current government...
Could I just interrupt and say that Jennifer Welsh on the podcast on the weekend said that a return to the status quo ante in the United States was the least likely outcome.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and I mean, this is just also a universal truth that a lot of these institutions, a lot of these relationships, they're very easy to tear down and very difficult to rebuild. And the trust in particular will be very difficult to rebuild, not to mention the fact that domestically, the politics of MAGA are not going anywhere, Trump or no Trump. So the U.S. has fundamentally changed in a lot of ways, and that's something I think that we're still grappling with. But I think the challenge for Carney when it comes to using something like the agreement with China as a way to sort of maybe as a tool, perhaps as a bargaining chip within CUSMA, is that there's a risk there. So, obviously our overdependence on the United States has created a massive economic vulnerability for us, but also inculcating more dependence with China is a huge vulnerability. Like this is a government that is absolutely known to use trade in a weaponized way. And that's what they did with canola. That's actually how we got here, is that they picked the sector that is least harmful to them and they tariff the shit out of it to try to put pressure on other countries. And so if we talk about a future, one that Scott described, where we effectively agree to the demise of the Canadian auto sector in favor of bringing in investment from Chinese companies to build Chinese cars here, well, then we have built an entire sector in the hands of a country that not only doesn't share our values, but is also has shown themselves very willing to be untrustworthy and willing to weaponize that trade dependence. So there's a real danger there in swapping one risky dependence for another one over the long term.
I just want to say, I don't want to interrupt you, but I want to say, just for the sake of clarity, that is not the path that I advocate for, and it's not the path that I even predict. I actually think that the benefit of opening the door to Chinese autos is that it will discipline and put tension into the relationship with the United States in a way that would be beneficial for us. That's maybe I'm naive on that, but yeah, I agree. Can I say, one of the backdrops to this conversation that people you hear constantly, people are like, oh my God, like in Canada, we're so pathetic the way we let ourselves just drift into a relationship of dependency with the United States where we'd had no agency whatsoever, and economically, diplomatically, militarily, culturally, we're so complete. I don't know, man. What's like, I mean, I think we're overstating. I'm not suggesting anybody on this panel, but I've heard lots and lots and lots of these things. And sometimes it's kind of like there's that uh, this is a critique that, you hear from people where they're like, well, and really what they're saying is there's a successive liberal governments, with Brian Mulroney thrown in for free trade, made us, such a vassal state of the United. I don't know, man. We're in the American orbit. They're the most powerful. I don't know that we didn't, for years and decades, have the ability to say no. We said no in Iraq. We weren't with them on Vietnam. There are all sorts of choices we made. The difference is that America didn't say we're intolerant of any disagreement whatsoever. Now America is saying that. And when I don't think that is a permanent condition necessarily. I think that for reasons of domestic political self-interest, it will become appealing for future American leaders to say, you know what, let's kind of course correct here on who our friends are and who they aren't, who we want good relationships with and who we don't. I don't know. I think a lot of America first feeling may persist, but I'm not certain that this aspect of Trump's foreign policy is with us forever. And I think we are overreacting sometimes when we say, well, that's dead and buried forever. I think we want to put some tension into the system to make it harder for them to make shittier choices for us. But like, is it not going to be sensible for somebody when they find that everything is more expensive in the United States, when they find that the promises of a manufacturing rebirth have not come true, when they find that the world is less safe and they're more exposed, and Europe and Canada says, go fuck your hat to America, don't you think it's going to become politically advantageous for somebody to say, well, why do we want to keep that going? Like, we're surrendering ourselves to the Chinese. We're allowing them to deal with Canada. We're allowing them to take over Africa. We're forcing Europe and Keir Starmer to think about striking new deals. Why would we want that? Why is that in America's interest? The soft power versus hard power discussion in some ways, David, that you're talking about. I think there will be a case for soft power in the United States as they realize all that they're losing in the next 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's go into that, Jordan, which is
this is policy wonky. Sorry.
No. Let's go into, we take the world as we see it, not as we wish it to be. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. This feels like a change in Canadian policy to me, because it doesn't feel to me like you would work hard to have a landmines treaty if you were just taking the world as you saw it, not the world as you wish it to be. And so Lloyd Axworthy, who fought for a landmines treaty, has kind of taken up this cause, and he's for those of you who don't know out there, you youngins, was a liberal institution of the 80s and 90s, and on the left wing of the party, was foreign affairs minister, etc. But I don't think that that's the only, like, I mean, my polling over the years has told me that Canadians like to see themselves internationally as soft power, advocates of peace, compassionate people who provide foreign aid to people. I know that there's lots of people on the right who've liked to say, listen, we're a warrior nation. We fought in wars. All this soft stuff is bullshit. But that's not really how most Canadians see the country, as a hard power, fighting wars country. They see us as a soft power, values-based country. And now our foreign policy seems very, very largely dominated by economics and overlooking a lot of things that we were not inclined to overlook before. Now, I know that everything's changed. I know that we're prepared to build pipelines where we weren't prepared to build pipelines and all that. But I am looking at this as yet another opening in which part of the Liberal coalition, if on the Canada-US side, it's a cleavage that threatens the Conservatives. This is a cleavage that threatens the Liberal vote, in my view. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's uncomfortable for the Liberal coalition, that's for sure. And I mean, I certainly the things that Lloyd Axworthy has been expressing, I hear a lot in my quarters. I think that's to be expected. And look, I think right now there's a seduction to the realism of the type that Carney's describing. It sounds right for the moment, but there's a danger in it too, which is that yes, the world is as it is, but of course, we also have a hand in shaping what that international world is through our own actions, through our actions with allies, through our decisions to push back on the Americans or not, through the mechanisms we engage in or we don't engage in. And so I think the danger in that line of thinking, and this is maybe more from a content perspective, is that it does blind you to the potential in that soft power, which is real, and has led to significant changes globally over the many years that Canada has been an active actor on the international stage. So it's not so simple to quarantine these things. You can't just do economic deals and not get into the rest of the murky politics of it. And I actually think the China agreement's a great example of that. Are we being pushed around by China when we called back 2 MPs from Taiwan? Maybe. This is all connected, right? So there's no sort of sterile economic deal only that avoids these difficult questions. And I do think that there is a large swath of Canadians who have a pretty reasonable demand of their government, which is they want the government to diversify trade partners in the light of the existential threat from the United States, but they want them to do it like largely congruent with Canadian values and in a way that protects Canadian sovereignty and security. And that formulation, I think, is one that the government has to be really careful to make sure that they are checking all of those boxes when they're coming back with these agreements and telling that story to Canadians. And so far, they've done the economic piece in a lot of these, but they really haven't been attentive to those other ones. We haven't even really touched on the question of national security and foreign interference and some of those implications of this deal, but there will be implications for that. So the government has to, I think, look at shoring up their flank on this, because over time, I think it does create a problem if the goal is just to diversify the trade relationships at any cost with anybody. Like, where is the line on that? And that's not clear yet with the current government.
Where do you think Canadians want it to be? Not where do you think it should be, but where do you think Canadians want it to be? Carney says, I shouldn't put words in his mouth, but what it looked like to me was, listen, I'm just there selling canola and buying cars, right? I'm not going to talk to them about the Uyghurs. They don't want to talk about the Uyghurs. They want to buy canola and sell cars.
Yeah, but he did more than that, right? Like when he's there talking about a new world order and frankly, not looking unhappy about it. I think the optics of that were not great when it comes to this. Maybe in his mind, what he's doing is acknowledging a reality that's out there, but that also is reinforcing a narrative that's very powerful for China. And it's not just an economic narrative, right? It's also a narrative about the type of government that they are, about the way they deal with other countries, about the way they deal with democracy in places like Taiwan, the way they deal with the Uyghurs and minorities. All kinds of things are packed into that statement. And again, I think the danger here is that maybe the math is sort of very clear on the trade front about what the benefits this will bring. And again, we've complicated that. Maybe it's not so clear. But those other issues you can't hermetically seal it off from that. And Canadians want to see a government that can go and do those deals with other countries without selling out on some of those basic values. And I think that part of this too is that, when we look to Asia as for trade diversification, of course, Asia is not just China. There's Korea, there's Japan, there's other partners we can be looking to there as well. And again, this is part of a story that the current government could be telling about the work that they're doing and sort of reassuring that they're remaining in touch with those things. But that's not a story that's really being told to Canadian voters in any concerted way.
Okay, cool. Scott, quickly, because we're running out of time, I know you're a writer and a great writer. So just going to say to you, Carney seems to have a knack for ringing phrases, because we take the world as we find it, not as we wish it to be, is quite a thing. And it seems to have gone around the world as a phrase.
Yeah. And it really does penetrate. He's able to capture, and if you look at it, a couple of times that he's done this, obviously early in the election campaign, remember exactly the date. It was March 28th when he declared, look, the relationship with the United States as we know it is over. Those sort of simple, unadorned declarations that cut through the bullshit, and people go, yeah, man, that's it. So he has a talent for that. He also has a talent for it in a way that you need to take care, though, because I think New World Order is a phrase that is steeped with a lot of meaning for a lot of people. And I felt when I was making my point at the beginning of this podcast that I had to define what I meant and didn't mean in referencing his use of New World Order. So, like, it means wrestling to some people, right? It means something way different to lots of other folks. I think this topic that we're touching on here, though, I'll just be real fast on this soft power thing and how to react to a world that has changed and that feels incredibly hostile and dangerous all of a sudden. At the same time, providing Canadians with a reassurance that we haven't just abandoned all of those values. I think that circle may be easier to square than we think. And here's how I think about it. I think the Canadians do want to see us strike these deals and create these opportunities and get this leverage that we're getting. But then I think where they would be contented to, and maybe in the past where you could strike a deal with China on trade, at the same time that an obligatory portion of the meeting would be spent on discussing human rights. Maybe that world is gone now. Maybe it's harder to have that like in the same way that it was possible to say no to BMD to the United States, but continue to work with them on NORAD. Maybe now we're in a world of like, if you say no to me on the smallest of things, I will say, fuck you up and down the line. But to me, it's multilateralism. To me, that's where you can square the circle. And as long as we can be a forceful voice in terms of saying, well, let's preserve those multilateral institutions that we think are of value, reinvent those that need work, and completely rebuild those that appear to be either destroyed or in the process of crumbling.
You're talking about 3 years from now, presumably after Trump.
No, I think you could. No, I think politically, this minute, you can get away with talking about it. I'll give you an example from the weekend. I think that Carney, it was a very, because it could have made some eyes roll. But when he talked about Qatar, he said, we're both middle powers. We're both middle powers. So we're going to strike this investment pact, but it also means that we recognize that both of us require a world where there are places that we can plug into as middle powers, institutions, multilateral forums that we can take part in. And those things are getting assembled a little bit more of an ad hoc fashion these days. And I thought that was an interesting argument for him to use. I think it may stretch credulity when it comes to using it with respect to Qatar in some ways, but the logic is there. You can hear it, and we're going to hear more about it. We're taping this just on the eve of him going to Davos. I think you're going to hear more of it at Davos. So I think that he can square the circle by striking these kinds of deals, say this is a politics of necessity given where Trump has taken us. But as long as he's also seen episodically as popping up to be a voice for how do we protect the interests of a country like Canada through multilateral institutions and where they've been busted, let's see how we can recreate them, reassemble them so that smaller nations aren't just corks in the river that's run by China and the United States. I think that will give Canadians the reassurance they need on that front, and that will be good enough. And by the way, I don't think it's all bullshit. My guess is those institutions do need repair and reconstruction. And if not Mark Carney, who? He is the smartest motherfucker in the world to try to deal with those things. So I think that makes some sense. And that's how I think we'll square this. And bilateral deals, it's going to be pretty hardcore realpolitik and economics. The multilateral work is where we'll be able to give voice to our values.
But maybe don't join the Board of Peace.
Well, that's the son of a bitch of a thing, isn't it? I mean, no kidding. He can't say no. He cannot say no because it would be so offensive to Trump on the eve of this thing. But boy, oh boy, I watched his press conference. I had to cover it live for CGV. And he danced and dangled, and his answer was an hour long on that question. Like, how do you pay $1 billion into what may go into God only knows whose pocket to participate in this thing that is set to do what? We don't know. But I don't know how.
I've been trying to figure him out on this stuff, and it looks to me like whether it's the Board of Peace or the FIFA prize, he's prepared to debase himself personally to keep Trump happy. But
because he knows that.
But when he's talking about the country as opposed to himself, he has lines. Like, I think Denmark and Greenland is pretty interesting, right?
But that's why the multilateral argument I'm making, I think, is significant, because, like, he can eat shit, because he knows if he doesn't eat shit when it comes to bilateral discussions with Trump, it's not just him and his political standing. It's going to be workers and industries that suffer the consequence when Trump goes bananas. But when it comes to NATO, he's got to say no. Like, he's got to be there for NATO. He must be there for NATO. And by the way, there'd be a massive political price to pay if we suddenly seem like we're walking away from NATO or we're indifferent to NATO.
Well, it's
Even
not in our
using
interest.
putting troops there, I think, is a way of saying, I haven't lost all compass here, guys. Okay. So if you're worried about the deal with China, right, take comfort in the fact that I'm standing with NATO when it comes to Greenland.
Right. But I think that what I was trying to say is I think Trump likes him. And I think Trump likes him around. And Carney's prepared to play that role for Trump, even though it is kind of humiliating. But
well,
right?
dangerous.
And dangerous.
We've seen him have play things and then get bored of them.
Yeah. Last thought, Jordan.
Yeah, I mean, I think we covered it. There are not a lot of good answers here, but Carney has to be able to speak not just to the economics of this stuff, but all those other soft pieces too, and think about what Canadians are taking away from this here at home.
Okay, cool. All right, Mr. Pinsent, can you assemble the remaining accursed for our Hey Yous?
Ladies and gentlemen, please return to your seats. The Hey Yous are about to begin.
My Hey You goes out to Francois Legault and CAC. He stepped down this past week as announced that he intends to resign.
A rare curse of politics acknowledgement that Quebec exists.
There we go. But there's lots of ways of looking at it, and everybody's doing.
What do you mean people aren't clamoring for
guy.
4 Anglos to weigh in on?
It's a pretty significant development, and it's going to be an important factor in what the politics of 2026 look like domestically, as we see if the Peckies are able to get elected and so on and so forth. But I want to make this thing where we do this sort of, the kind of political obituary and the epitaph on it. For decades, people talked about a third wave movement in Quebec. Like, basically, after the Quiet Revolution, this was a Sasquatch people were tromping through the forest trying to locate. Can we have a third way? One, a party that isn't just strictly federalist, or strictly defined by its desire to make Quebec independent. And Legault did it, and he did it. And sure, he's going out on his ass like a lot of us do, a lot of politicians do after 10 years, but he had quite a run, and he did create something that many people in conventional political world didn't think was possible. So, hats off. We'll see whether it's sustaining. We'll see whether it can live past him. That will be the true test of time for it. But he did something that people said couldn't happen, and he did it for quite a long time and sustained his popularity while doing it for quite a long time.
During COVID, he was just massively popular. I was living in Quebec, and the locals up there would talk about Monsieur Legault like he was like somebody, like he was like the boss of the, right? He says we can't go out, and they were fine with it. Yeah. Jordan, you got a Hey You?
I do. Actually, I have 2 brief ones today. So the first one is actually going out to anybody who is managing a campaign or an MP office or anything like that. And this is based on the story you guys probably saw about the NDP leadership candidate Rob Ashton getting busted for using AI in his responses on an Ask Me Anything. It's uniquely bad for him because, of course, he's talking about the risks of people being put out of work by AI. So he's got a real optics problem.
Why would he want to do that?
Sorry?
Why would he want to do that?
To use AI? Well, yeah. This brings me to my point.
Productivity and efficiency, David.
Every campaign and every campaign office, you all have some staffer, if not all of them, who are doing the same thing. They are using AI in their day-to-day work. They are using ChatGPT for this stuff. You need an AI use policy. You need to get clear with your staff about when it's acceptable, how to use it, when not to use it, how to disclose that you're using it. don't fucking sleep on it because it is going to blow up in your face exactly in this way. So take that cautionary tale and go. And there's lots of good examples of these types of policies that are available. You can find them, pick one and use it and educate your staff on it. Otherwise, it's going to be you in the headline next. And the second hey you I have is going out to Jim Rakowski. So he's EB's chief of staff. Some of you may have seen he's taking leave for cancer treatment. And Jim is one of the nicest and smartest people, I think, in senior political roles that you can find anywhere in the country. So I just wanted to wish him well.
Yeah, I met him. He's a nice guy. Yeah, very nice. Good luck there. My hey you very quickly goes out to Canada's first ministers. One of the things when we seem to have unity and purpose back in the spring, everybody committed to getting rid of internal trade barriers. Everybody committed to one Canadian market. And I haven't heard anything about that meaningfully for months and months, other than that liquor is not going to be included outrageously. So you know what? Get back to the table and get your fucking shit together. I mean, if we can do deals with China, if we can do deals with Qatar, surely we can do a deal internally. And that would, I think, provide Canadians with a lot of confidence that the country was on the right road. Plus, I think everybody said at the time, would make a hell of a difference economically. So let's just get together and do this. All right. Thank you, Accursed, for watching and listening. Thank you, Jordan and Scott, for being here, unlike that fucking lout Teneycke, who's off in Tulum. I know. And
we should use generative AI to replicate.
We can just generate it.
You know, there's nobody that can predict what Kory's going to say. And I want to thank the sponsors who made the show possible. Come back next week. There'll be more Curse of Politics. See you then.